Hi, this is David at TED-IELTS, and today we're going to take a break from our usual lessons on IELTS writing to talk about the speaking test. In particular, we're going to look at part 2 and a cue card that asks you to describe a charity. Rather than just give you my sample Band 9 answer, I want to break this down into a few different sections. First, we're going to analyze the cue card. Then we're going to look at some useful vocabulary. Then I'll talk briefly about note-taking before finally I give you my sample answer. This video is divided into chapters so that you can jump back and forth to the sections that most interest you. But I think it's better to watch the whole thing. Also, you can turn on the subtitles if you struggle to understand everything that I'm saying. Okay, let's begin our lesson. In part 2 of the IELTS speaking test, you will be asked to describe something. There are many different possibilities for this, including people, memories, objects, places, and animals. But today we're going to look at something a little different. It's describing a charity. First of all, let's look at a likely cue card for this topic. It says, describe a charity which is important to you. You should say what the charity does, why you're interested in this charity, how the charity raises money, and explain whether you think it is important for people to get involved in charity work. When you're given a cue card like this, you should first analyze it. We're going to do that in depth here, but obviously in the real exam you have just 1 minute, so you need to think very quickly. It is important to get an understanding of the topic without reading the cue card over and over, so you must quickly identify the main idea expressed and get an understanding of what you must say. The most important part is the first sentence. In this case, we need to think about two things. One, our answer must revolve around a charity. That means not a business or government. And two, it must be one that we consider important, so don't go ahead and criticize it later. This probably sounds very obvious, but you would be surprised how easy it is to panic and make a mistake. Some people think about charities, then giving money, and that might bring them back to a business or a governmental agency. However, this is not what you've been asked to do, so that would not be a good answer. As for the bullet points, you do not really need to talk about them, but it is generally a good idea to do so. They can help you give a full, rounded answer that allows you to show off your English skills and avoid repetition or hesitation. The cue card is usually structured in such a way that you can explain the main topic adequately, but of course, if you have a better idea, then it's fine to follow that instead. When it comes to vocabulary for IELTS, the most important thing is to use words accurately. So don't go searching through the dictionary for obscure words that are loosely related to the topic of charity. The chances are that you won't know how to use them. Instead, aim to use words that are specific to the topic, but that you know how to use properly. One great way to learn these is to read about specific IELTS topics. For example, if you wanted to learn about charities, you can go and find an article in a magazine or on a website that discusses charities. Make note of new words and how they're used in a sentence. This is a really valuable method for learning and should be applied to all IELTS topics. Today, however, I'm going to give you some specific language that you can learn quickly. Let's start with the main topic itself, charity. Hopefully you already know what that means, but I want to show you here how to use it in its different parts of speech. We have charity as a noun, charitable as an adjective, and charitably as an adverb. Being able to use these correctly will not just mean you have turned one word into three, but that you have demonstrated a subtle and advanced grasp of both vocabulary and grammar. Our next word is donation. This is a noun, and it means an amount of money given to a good cause. To show further mastery of the language, you can convert this into its verb form, donate. Let's look at a few adjectives now. First of all, giving. You probably thought of that as a verb or a gerund, but Whilst it can be, in this case it is an adjective. She was a giving person by nature. It means generous and can be used to refer to people who like to give money away. Underprivileged is another word that could arise when talking about charity, because often we're talking about helping people who've had difficult lives. And transparent is useful because this is an issue that comes into play when we're talking about non-profit organizations. The people who give to charities must ask themselves first whether they can trust that organization, and this is what transparency is all about. Again, it's worth knowing both transparent, the adjective, and transparency, the noun. Next up, we have volunteer. This could be a verb or a noun. A volunteer is a person who helps at a charitable organization. The action that they're doing is volunteering. If you wanted to turn this into an adjective, we could say voluntary. Sometimes we talk about voluntary work to talk about helping out a charity. Finally, please note that any IELTS Part 2 answer is going to involve vocabulary that is specific to the thing you choose to discuss. A charity that helps animals will involve different language from the ones that help people. Charities about women's issues will be different from ones about helping veterans, which will be different from ones about helping children. Make sure that you don't just cram your answer full of generic charity vocabulary, and instead use whatever language is specific and correct to give you the best description of your chosen charity. Right, so we've now talked about analysing the question and picking the right sort of language to use. Let's take a moment to think about making notes. From the time you're given the cue card until you start talking, you have just 1 minute to prepare your answer. During this time, it is a good idea to make a few notes on the paper you're given. The time will fly by quickly and you cannot write nearly as much as you would think, so don't even think about writing full sentences. Instead, note down important words that you think could help give you a good answer. These might be words that are useful, interesting vocabulary, something to help you structure your speech or remind you later. It is particularly helpful if these can remind you of the intended order in which you wanted to discuss things, or a key point you wanted to come back to later in your answer and you think you might forget. Whatever you write is only for your personal use, so don't worry about spelling and grammar. Just note down a few words quickly and no one will ever look at them except you. Here is what I would write on my note paper. It probably doesn't make much sense to you, but that's okay. It would help give me a better answer, and that's all that matters. Now I'm going to give you my sample answer. There is one charity that is important to me above all others. It is called the Whale and Dolphin Conservation Society, and I have given them money periodically since I was a small child. All my life I've been in love with the sea and the incredible animals that live there. When I was young, my mom and dad paid for a subscription to this charity, and so they would send me pictures and videos about whales. I loved the feeling of helping in some small way. Later, I would organize charity events to raise money for them, and finally, when I was an adult, I would just set aside a small portion of my income to go to that charity. The Whale and Dolphin Conservation Society is dedicated to the preservation of whales and dolphins, as its name suggests. It is a global charity, but was founded in the UK. When I was young, I was fascinated by its work protecting whales off the western coast of Canada and the United States, but its work extends well beyond that because of the migratory nature of these animals. They raise their money in different ways, but rely heavily upon donations from people. They also let people adopt a whale or dolphin, which essentially means that they pay to follow that animal's life, and the money they give is used to fund its protection. This lets people feel that they are responsible for the creature's welfare, giving them a more personal relationship. I think that it is really important to give to charity or get involved in some way. Most people live selfish lives focused on their own well-being, but giving to others or helping to animals is far more rewarding and ultimately helps to make the world a better place. This answer mostly followed the structure of the cue card, but you will have noticed that I inverted the order of the first two bullet points. I did this because I felt it was a more natural storytelling structure to start with my personal interest. Whenever I give sample answers for part 2 of the IELTS speaking test, I like to do this. Having a natural story that originates in childhood tends to make it easier to speak freely and in a more interesting way. As for the language I used, there were many phrases that you could borrow and adapt to talk about a charity that interests you. I said things like give money periodically, organize charity events, raise money, set aside a small portion of my income, rely upon donations, and so on. There was also some language specific to my preferred charity, of course. Given that mine was about whales and dolphins, language like off the coast of Canada and migratory nature was appropriate. This would not apply to you if your charity looked at cities or rainforests, for example. Well, that's all for today's lesson. I hope this has been useful for you. Please consider giving it a like if you can. You can also subscribe if you want more high-quality IELTS lessons. I upload videos every Friday morning, and these are aimed at giving you realistic and actionable advice to help you achieve success in your next IELTS exam.